On the Fan, always informative at NRL Physio, Mr. Brian Seeney. I want to talk about injury-prone players this week. Is that a fair tag? I think back to Eric Growth in the early days, the great Parramatta winger. He'd miss a few games, people say injury-prone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now in more recent times, Josh Dugan, he would be perceived as injury-prone. Is the tag fair?
Yeah, look, it's probably as a whole, it's a bit of an unfair tag because it is sometimes quite hard to tell whether a player will suffer an injury anywhere in their body, but you can certainly identify areas where a player may be prone to injury in certain joints, certain muscles. So there are players that you could look at and say, oh, they are prone to, say, a hamstring injury or a shoulder dislocation.
Okay, well, that's fair enough. Can we break it down a little further? Because, you know, the game that we play, I mean, it's damn hard. Like, you know, I'm not surprised. It'd be possible for a player to get injured every week, and it's not reported.
Of course.
But of a more serious kind. Does that put them in the injury-prone category?
Yeah, absolutely. So, look, a good way to sort of identify whether an injury that's suffered by a player could have been due to being prone to that injury. One of the great guides is it contact or non-contact? Right. Because a contact injury, if you cop a blow...
Yeah, that's what I mean. Of course it could happen to anyone.
That's exactly right. So you're not going to call that being prone to an injury. But if you suffer these non-contact injuries, so your hamstring injury, for example, being shot by a sniper, an ACL injury, changing direction and the knee collapses, there can be a deficit in the player there that requires, you know, rehab, different things to make sure that we ensure that that player doesn't suffer the injury moving into the future.
And I would think, and I won't put names to it, but mentally, I mean, if you've had the injury a couple of times, let's say a broken jaw.
Absolutely.
I mean, who could excuse the player for being hesitant?
That's exactly right. And look, I'm sure anybody out there who's played footy knows that as soon as you hesitate, that's usually when you suffer more injuries. So being hesitant going into that contact can actually make you more prone to injury.
Okay, I'm gonna list one of my favourite players right now for the way he played, Steve Matai, the former Manly centre. You know, every game. You know, feeling of this, and does that mean that he was injury prone?
Look, with Matai, one of my, I guess, biggest theories and things that I like to say about him is he just played like a bull at a gate. So he had no filter, very little self-preservation, would fly in at 100 miles an hour, not worrying about, am I going to get injured when I make this hit? It's, I'm going to hit this guy. And there are some players who play with more self-preservation, so they go into tackles a little bit smarter, a little bit with more guile to make sure that they look after their bodies. But then there are other players who lack that filter, or they're a little bit less likely to preserve their body, fly in, make the hit, and unfortunately they can be more prone to injury.
I think we're all being a little more enlightened about the tag injury prone. You can follow this man on Twitter at NRL Physio. Brian, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Vossi.